evil is turned for good. The principle has been repeated again and again in Jewish history. Their history of the Jewish people is ultimately a history of redemption. It's heading to Messiah's return. And so even this, you can see it in world history throughout the ages. Evil men, evil powers that have come against Israel, it has been all turned around. Nero dies by his own hand. Hitler, we shared on Friday, dies by his own hand. The leaders of the Third Reich are judged and put to death in Nuremberg, the very place where they began their war against the Jewish people. Saddam Hussein dies in the very chambers that he built to torture and execute his enemies. And it's manifest again and again. There were leaders of a particular kingdom, a king and a queen, who decide to war against the Jewish people. They declare that the Jewish people would be expelled. Either they convert to Catholicism, they flee, or they be killed. It was in Spain, and that marked the definitive end of the golden age of the Jewish people in Spain. So the Jewish people fled by land and by sea. The harbors were filled with ships. The king and queen were Ferdinand and Isabella. And the day of their expulsion, it was summer, the year 1492. The same week that the Jewish people filled the harbors and ports with their ships to set sail, there were 3 other ships waiting to sail: the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, captained by Christopher Columbus. The same king and queen who set the Jewish people sailing, expelled them, they also helped set sail the 3 ships. And these 3 ships would discover a new land. And this new land would become the greatest refuge of the Jewish people when they were persecuted throughout the world. The greatest safe haven of the children of Israel was America. From the same calamity, the same summer, the same month, the same week, 1492, the same place. No one was more evil than Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. They drove the Jews from Germany, from Europe. They killed, they annihilated the most evil of things. And yet, through that evil came the nation of Israel. It is questionable whether the nation of Israel would have been raised from the dead out of that if that had not happened. Out of the evil of the war before it, the carnage, the destruction of World War I, the land of Israel came to the British Empire. The Turkish Empire fell. And because of that, the British Empire gave the land back to the Jewish people. And then on the eve of the Second World War, another evil thing came: the rebirth, the resurrection of the nation of Israel after 2,000 years. God is good. And He is good all the time, as it said. And God is also God all the time. And so He is not only good, He's God. And so He's over everything. He is not only God of the good, He is God of all. He is God over all, the Lord of all. He is all good, but He's God, so He's not only God of the good or over good, He's God over good and evil and everything. Which is an awesome thing, because it means even evil must kneel down to God. And even though evil by nature is outside the will of God, in the end it must bow down to the will of God. And even accomplish His purposes from the beginning. It means that there's nothing that will overcome the good in the end. And that good will overcome all. And that means it's not only the good that works for good, it means even the evil will work for good. That means all things work for good for those who are in the will of God. I want to show you a mystery. Sometimes people make the mistake of thinking that Purim is simply a fun holiday. Purim contains some of the deepest, most cosmic of truths and revelations. You know Joseph of Genesis. It's a story of evil triumphing over good for a time. He's brutalized by his brothers, sold into slavery, taken as dead, sent to a foreign land, falsely accused of rape, thrown into prison, a stranger in a strange land. His life is one evil after the other, trampling the good. And yet in prison, he interprets a dream by the Spirit of God. And through all this, he ends up being lifted up to the throne of Egypt. The number 2 person, the prime minister of Egypt, under the Pharaoh. And he's there to bring redemption to the land. And he does. And ultimately to bring redemption to his family. And ultimately he's to stand before his brothers who had brought such evil in his life, who were guilty of all that had happened in his life. And they come back and they realize who he is. And they fear that Joseph is going to judge them after their father's death, is going to destroy them. They appeal to him. And yet he says to them, his brothers, these words. He says, "You intended evil against me, but God intended it for good, to bring everything to pass that has now happened, to save the lives of many people." They meant it for evil, God meant it for good. The very same thing they meant for evil, God meant it for good. The very same events, the very same things, all that was ultimately for good. That to bring Joseph to Egypt